Early in my pastorate, I served a 2-point rural charge. That is, I had 2 churches that shared me as a pastor. And in the United Methodist Church, the pastor is the chair of the nominations committee. That's the committee that nominates people to go on the administrative committees for the church. And in this kind of a setting, sometimes you might have a committee that is unique to an individual church, such as trustees who oversee what goes on just in that church. But you also have offices that oversee the entire charge. One of those offices was the charge treasurer. This was the person who was responsible for paying my salary each month, sending money off to pay for my insurance and pension, and also paying the conference apportionments, how we supported ministries and missions throughout the conference and the world. And in my very first year, I was having a nominations meeting, the very first one there. And the woman who was the charge treasurer looked up, and with what seemed to be a heavy heart said, "Well, I've been serving in this position for many years, and I know that someone from the other church may want to take over this responsibility, and so I am willing to let it go." And I thought to myself, this poor woman has been doing this job for longer than she cares to, and she'd like to hand it off to someone else. So I took that information, I went to the other church where this woman was not a member, and I extended an invitation. Someone came up to me and said, "I think I could do that position." So the following Wednesday, I saw the church treasurer right before choir practice. She was also the accompanist in this church. And I said, "Good news. I found someone from the other church who is willing to take over your job as treasurer." And she said, "Oh." Then the following Sunday, a member of that church came to me and very accusatory said, "Why are we replacing the treasurer? Why are we replacing so-and-so in this position?" And I said, "Because she asked to be replaced." Well, she didn't mean it. And everybody who knows her knows that she wouldn't give that up willingly. And not only that, but she had complained to her husband, she had complained to this other member, and members of this one church got together and started bad-mouthing the person who was the member of the other church and how busy she was and how she wouldn't have time to do the job properly, and it would really be a disaster if that were to happen. So I went back to the person who agreed to take the position, and I said, "It turns out that so-and-so isn't that enthusiastic about giving up the position. Would you mind if she continued to do that?" And she said, "That's perfectly all right with me. I'm happy for her to." So the situation wound up getting worked out, but we had to go through this huge morass in order to get there. We did not follow what Jesus is teaching us at the end of this gospel passage. Let your yes be yes, and your no be no. Say what you mean, and mean what you say. Now, Jesus tells us in the Sermon on the Mount that he is interpreting the law of the Old Testament. And he's interpreting it in a way that takes something that may have been pretty specific, and he's broadening it to include the larger area of Christian ethics. In the case of swearing of oaths, which was mentioned just before this final passage at the end of the gospel reading, that has to do with passages in the Old Testament relating to what we would think of as legal proceedings. Whenever there's a dispute between 2 parties, and each party is giving his or her version of what happened. So the precept in that case is against not deceiving people, not deliberately lying in order to further your case, not intentionally misleading other people. This is something that has its root in the Ten Commandments and the commandment against bearing false witness. But Matthew, I believe, like all of the Gospels, is writing for a church community, writing for a community in his day and for subsequent generations, as it turns out. And in the church, whenever we are not honest with each other, when our yes doesn't really mean yes, our no doesn't really mean no, we're not doing it because we want to deliberately mislead. Usually our intentions are good. We want to avoid embarrassing somebody. We want to avoid further conflict. And we don't want to hurt someone's feelings. So we don't always say what we mean. Going back to that illustration that I used earlier, it would have been very tough for us sitting around the table in the nominations committee to be perfectly honest in that setting. It would mean the church treasurer saying, I have been doing this for a number of years. She was a retired banker. She did the job well. She enjoyed doing it. She enjoyed the importance that it gave her among both of these churches. And she really wanted to keep doing it. But she didn't want to hurt anyone's feelings or make the other church feel like it was a power grab. So only if no one insisted in the other church about taking the position was she interested in giving it up. And if she was further honest beyond that, she could have pointed a finger at me and said, and Doug, you're new at this. You're following the book as you were trained to do. But you have to learn that even though some of us do these positions well and have been doing it without complaint for a long time, we still need some encouragement and we still need some gratitude from you. You need to find some way as pastor to do that. And what I've learned from Northview, it may have been helpful in that setting to do in those two churches what we do here on the very first Sunday of the year, where we recognize leaders in different committee areas and we talk about the commitment that everyone needs and what a valuable way that is to carry out our biblical mission. That's the nature of being fully and completely honest with each other. Friday was Valentine's Day. It's a day where we sentimentalize and commercialize romantic love. But if you think about people you love, think about those who are closest to you. Parents and children, siblings, spouses, life partners, best friends. You know that those people that you love the most, those people that you are closest to, are also the people who can irritate you like no one else and can break your heart like nobody else can. That is, despite our attempts to sentimentalize it, loving people is very hard work. It involves being courageous, being patient, letting down our guard, and being vulnerable. Love takes effort. This particular passage at the end of the gospel reading is one that's not specifically religious. It's the kind of thing that a self-help writer might take out of context and expound on in a book. But when you and I read this in the context of a gospel teaching, it reminds us that in that difficult work of loving one another, we are not alone. The love of God is within us. The sacrificial love, the selfless love, the love that saves and redeems, the love that reconciles, the love that takes the father in the prodigal son parable off his porch and has him embrace his son. That is the love of Christ that is within us. And it is that love that empowers us to do the oftentimes challenging and always essential work of loving each other and being honest with each other. Amen.